Alright, let's dive into something that's been making headlines recently: North Korea's latest ballistic missile launch over the Sea of Japan. But before we get into the specifics, let me just say, this situation is a perfect example of how geopolitical tensions can escalate in ways that are both predictable and yet, somehow, still shocking. What immediately grabs my attention is the timing of this launch. It comes right after North Korea slammed Japan for its military buildup in the Pacific. Personally, I think this is more than just a coincidence. It feels like a calculated move by Pyongyang to send a message, not just to Japan, but to the entire region. What makes this really interesting is how it ties into the broader narrative of North Korea's isolation and its efforts to assert itself on the global stage. In my opinion, this isn't just about military capability, it's about psychological warfare, about reminding everyone that North Korea is still a player, still a threat. Now, let's talk about Japan's response. Tokyo has been ramping up its defense spending, with a 9.7% increase to $62.2 billion in 2025. That's the highest share of its GDP since 1958. One thing that immediately stands out is how Japan is framing this. They're calling it a bare minimum defense capability, not meant to threaten other countries. But let's be real, when you're spending that kind of money on defense, it's hard not to see it as a response to regional threats, particularly from North Korea. What many people don't realize is that Japan's military buildup is also a reaction to China's growing influence in the region. This raises a deeper question: are we seeing the beginnings of a new arms race in East Asia? Another detail I find fascinating is the role of Kim Yo-jong, Kim Jong-un's sister. She's been increasingly vocal in North Korean state media, and her recent comments about Japan's transformation are no exception. From my perspective, Kim Yo-jong is becoming a key figure in North Korea's propaganda machine. She's not just a spokesperson, she's a symbol of the regime's continuity and strength. What this really suggests is that North Korea is trying to project an image of unity and resolve, even as it faces internal economic challenges and international isolation. Now, let's zoom out for a second. This launch comes at a time when North Korea is deepening its ties with Russia. Analysts believe that Pyongyang is supplying troops and munitions for Russia's war in Ukraine in exchange for financial support, food, energy, and military technology. If you take a step back and think about it, this is a strategic alliance that makes a lot of sense for both parties. Russia gets much-needed resources for its war effort, and North Korea gets a lifeline to sustain its economy and military programs. But here's where it gets really interesting. Some experts think this launch could be a test run for weapons that Kim Jong-un might showcase during his expected visit to Russia. Personally, I think this visit could be a game-changer, not just for North Korea and Russia, but for the entire geopolitical landscape. What's also worth noting is South Korea's position in all of this. President Lee Jae-myung has taken a more conciliatory approach, offering unconditional talks with North Korea. But so far, Pyongyang hasn't bitten. In my opinion, this highlights the complexity of inter-Korean relations. On one hand, there's a genuine desire for peace and dialogue; on the other, there's North Korea's stubborn refusal to engage unless it's on their terms. What this really suggests is that any progress in the region will require a delicate balance of diplomacy and pressure. Finally, let's talk about the bigger picture. This launch is just one event, but it's part of a larger pattern of escalating tensions in East Asia. With Japan's military buildup, North Korea's provocations, and China's growing assertiveness, the region is becoming increasingly volatile. If you take a step back and think about it, we're seeing the re-emergence of old rivalries and the formation of new alliances. This raises a deeper question: are we on the brink of a new Cold War in Asia? Personally, I think it's a question we all need to be asking. So, what's the takeaway here? In my opinion, this launch is more than just a military test; it's a statement, a reminder of North Korea's capabilities and its willingness to use them. But it's also a symptom of a larger, more complex issue: the struggle for power and influence in one of the most strategically important regions in the world. What makes this really interesting is how it forces us to think about the future of global security. Are we moving toward a more stable world, or are we on the brink of something far more dangerous? That's a question I'll leave you to ponder.